He's got too much pine tar.
Sloppy jalopy. They were doing the Chris Davis fishing for it.
Might be going to call George Brett out.
Well, he's out.
Yes,
Brett is out. Look at this. Brett is out. And
Steve McMahon.
he is out and having to be forcibly restrained from hitting plate umpire Tim McClellan.
Too much pot tar.
Way too much pot tar.
And welcome back to another episode of Too Much Pod Tar. As we continue our off-season episodes for each team, today we pick up with the Milwaukee Brewers. They finished 29-31 on the shortened season, but because of the expanded postseason format, 16 teams, 8 in each league, they made the postseason, and then got swept by the Dodgers in the wild card series. So yeah, we're not going to have that format next year, I don't think. It won't be 16 teams. Maybe it could end up being 14, but we'll see. I don't know what's going to happen with that, but just hopefully it's not 16. That's way too many in my opinion. But for this episode, to help me break down the Brewers, how their season went, and then going into their off season, what their moves, the moves that they should make, I got Zac Bellman on, who was on for our season preview show for them back, January, February, whenever it was, I forget. But yeah, he's an associate editor of a Wisconsin newspaper. So yeah, welcome back to the show.
Well, Alex, thank you for having me. And boy, the world has changed quite a bit since the last time we spoke.
Oh yeah, yep. Yeah, that was back when we thought it was going to be a full season. So.
Yep, exactly. And as you kind of bring that up, I think one of the interesting things to consider when you look at the obviously the prognosis that we had going in versus what ended up happening with the 60-game season is, I think, particularly in the Brewers' case, I think they were a team that was really built to maybe endure some struggles early on in a 162-game season. But, when you look at some of the guys that they brought in for this season, some early struggles in critical early games when you're looking at, obviously every game counts for about, 2.5 to 3 times more than it normally would in a 60-game format. So, it was obviously some early struggles for some key pieces that they brought in and that I kind of hoped would contribute over the course of a longer 162-game season. Didn't quite have the chance to do so, but it was certainly, an interesting season for the Brewers. Obviously, making the playoffs for the third straight year is an accomplishment for, a team that only has a handful of playoff, qualifications over their team history, and, making the playoffs 3 straight years, even in an expanded format, I think is something that you have to look at as an achievement for this organization. But obviously a 29-31 record, maybe fell a little bit below some of their expectations, and becoming the first team other than the Astros, who also went 29-31, this year, to qualify as a playoff team with a below 500 record is not exactly a distinction that they may proudly wave a banner for, in seasons to come. But, certainly an interesting season, and one that you have to look at overall is, pretty good accomplishment for the organization.
Yeah, for sure. And then obviously they had a run into the eventual World Series champion Dodgers in that first series. So that was obviously going to be tough when they got to face them.
Yeah, exactly. And, it's the second straight year for them losing to the eventual World Series champion. I'm not a huge believer in that as a silver lining, but, that's, I guess, worth something and, it was a buzzsaw. I think, as you near those final few weeks of the MLB season and you're looking at where seeding might match up, obviously the the goal is to make the tournament. Everyone has a chance to win once you make the tournament, but you were definitely looking to avoid the Dodgers for as long as you could, and um, they end up facing them in the first round, and those top two starters and that basically lineup you have to fear 1 through 9 was too much for them to overcome for sure. But yeah, definitely some positives as well as you look at the some of the individual performances for the Brewers. I think when I was looking at highlights from the 2020 season, I think two of them for me were the front end of the rotation and the back end of the bullpen. Brandon Woodruff, I think, solidified himself as kind of the ace of this staff. He'd kind of been flirting with that role for the last couple of years, but you know, really solidified himself as the go-to guy. Had an 8 inning performance, I believe, in the last week of the season that helped them make the playoffs. And overall for the season, had a 3.05 ERA, .99 WHIP, and a 3-5 record, despite really struggling for offensive help during his starts. And I think the other big starter for them was Corbin Burns, who, after some struggles in the bullpen, they basically had him relegated to double A, single A, triple A. He was in the minors most of last season after really struggling with an ERA of almost 10 in 2019. He returned to form in a big way, 4-1 record in 9 starts, 2.11 ERA. I think came like a third of an inning short of qualifying for the ERA lead, and was a fringe Cy Young candidate in the NL, and had a 1.02 WHIP as well. So he was phenomenal. That top two in the rotation is something definitely to be keeping an eye on as they continue to grow and mature in the rotation. And then the back end of the bullpen, Devin Williams was, I think, one of the stories of the shortened 2020 season, bursting onto the scene, winning NL Rookie of the Year and Reliever of the Year with a .33 ERA, 53 strikeouts in 27 innings, a .63 WHIP, and a 4-1 record out of the pen. He kept Milwaukee in several close games and set the table for Josh Hader while, also looking like the Brewers' potential closer of the future. And Josh Hader, as well. His ERA continued to go up a little bit, but he still converted 13 of 15 um, save opportunities, and started to develop that breaking pitch that I remember talking about in our season preview. Was something that I think hitters were starting to not respect. He started to throw that for strikes, and that became a pretty devastating combo with his fastball that is tough to pick up. So once hitters realized that they had to start respecting that breaking pitch, I think that rounded him out a little bit as a pitcher. So I think those were kind of the high points. I don't know if you want to get into a little bit of some of the low points, or if you had any direction you wanted to take this.
Yeah, I was going to actually mention one of the low points was, Christian Yelich. I don't know. Wanted to ask you, like, what do you think was wrong with him this year? Because he was obviously his first 2 years with the club, he was an MVP frontrunner, won an MVP, and back-to-back batting titles. And then this year just wasn't himself. I don't know if it was because of the circumstance of the season, just kind of never got it going. But no, he was
Yeah,
really bad to 205. He saw an increase in strikeout percentage as well. So
yeah, and watching just as a fan, I mean, he looked lost up there at some points. He was not picking up the breaking ball well. Not really catching up to the fastball. I mean, he looked completely different than the MVP candidate and MVP winner in 2018 that we had seen the first 2 years in Milwaukee. And you start to look at that 10-year extension that he signed and get a little bit worried. But I think as Brewers fans, we got to realize we're in this for the long haul. And I'm not overly concerned with one performance in a 60-game season because as I kind of said, there's so much more pressure on each individual game, and I think Major League Baseball players are very much creatures of habit, can potentially get inside their own heads at times, and we saw not just Yelich but quite a few stars this year struggle and perform below what we had kind of established as the expectation. So I'm not overwhelmingly concerned about Yelich individually. I will say the offense as a whole really struggled. And if you look at their batting average, they were 26th in Major League Baseball in batting average. Interestingly, the entire NL Central for some reason had holes in their bats all season long in that same category in batting average. St. Louis was 22nd, the Cubs were 27th, the Pirates were 28th, and the Reds were 30th. And the Brewers were also 26th in runs scored. And if you were watching this team all season long, you saw them flirt with multiple no hitters offensively. They actually got no hit by Alec Mills of the Cubs on September 13th during a really weird week-long stretch where they scored 19 runs on September 9th against the Tigers, got no hit on the 13th against the Cubs, and then 2 days later scored 18 runs against the Cardinals. So, I don't know what to make of that stretch, but I think one of the things that really hurt this offense was that Lorenzo Cain, their leadoff hitter for the last couple of years, obviously brought in the same day as Christian Yelich, opted out shortly after the season started. I think the Brewers really missed his leadoff ability and that, his ability to set the tone, work counts, although they, did get some decent leadoff appearances and from Eric Sogard. He was able to work walks and work counts and get on base quite a bit. But as you said, Christian Yelich was not himself, and I think the other guy that Milwaukee was really hoping to take a leap in his second year and his first technically full season with the Brewers was their second baseman Keston Hiura, who lost nearly 100 batting average points from 2019 to 2020, and was really also struggling with the strikeouts. And obviously, strikeouts are something that is kind of blowing up around the league right now. But especially with this offense, when you become reliant on the big extra base hit to bring people in, that's not often a winning formula in the league. So I think they really struggled across the board here. I don't know if you want to. I kind of wanted to touch on a little bit, if it's all right with you, Alex, the new pieces they brought in. If you wanted to talk about that.
Yeah, that's a good topic to talk about as well. Yeah, if you want to jump into that.
Yeah, because I remember in our preview, I remember talking about Justin Smoke and Omar Narvaez as guys that would potentially be big impact players for them. Obviously, Smoke, a former All-Star, Omar Narvaez, a former 20 home run guy, guys that they brought in that I really thought had that potential to be bounce back candidates in 2020. And like I kind of touched on in the intro was their ability to adjust to a shortened season with a new team. I think was something that really did not favor them getting off to hot starts. Justin Smoke batted 186 in 33 games before being cut, and Omar Narvaez batted 176 in 40 games. He was practically an empty uniform. Unfortunately, they still have him under contract for next year at 2.9 million. So he's probably their mainstay with Manny Pena for next season, and hopefully over a 162 game season he can figure it out. But he was just invisible out there offensively. A couple of the other guys they brought in, Josh Lindblom, after a stint in Korea, had a couple good starts in September that definitely kept them in the race, but he did not quite hit the ground running in the first year of his 3-year deal. Had a 5.16 ERA. And then, two of the other guys they brought in, Aviciel Garcia, hit 238 with 2 homers and slugged 326, which is his lowest slugging since his rookie year. Definitely hoping for him to step up in right/center field. He was also, kind of becoming the everyday center fielder for most of the year with Lorenzo Cain gone. So maybe that, is kind of the case sometimes when players are taking on unfamiliar defensive territory. It, can take away from their offensive ability and stuff like that. And then Luis Arias, acquired in the Trent Grisham trade, hit 239 in 41 games. Was kind of bouncing around the infield, relieving Orlando Arcia at shortstop and also playing some third base. And, was serviceable, but, he was somebody who's very highly touted for his hitting. So hitting 239 is, not quite what the Brewers, I think, were expecting in the immediate returns. And while they're watching Trent Grisham win a Gold Glove and Zach Davies, the other piece of that trade, contribute pretty substantially for San Diego. That had to be hard to watch for many Brewers fans who may have, kind of seen that as not great returns on that early trade. But I still think that was a good move. Grisham was not necessarily going to break into the Brewers outfield necessarily this year. Maybe after Lorenzo Cain. But you couldn't have foreseen that when you were making this trade, last winter. So, they got some serviceable output from some of their new acquisitions. One of the other ones they brought in to play corner infield was Jed Jerko, and he, at times I think was one of the offensive MVPs as far as guys you didn't really expect to stand up. He had 9 home runs in 42 games and played a very serviceable corner infield, which was a big hole for the Brewers coming into the year, and I think is a position they got to look at pretty hard, over the course of this offseason as well. So.
Yeah, so if it's all right with you, I'm going to transition to talk about the offseason coming up as well. So,
Sure.
Yeah. So, just talk about some of the free agents they have. One of them is one of their best players over his career was Ryan Braun, who's going to be a free agent. So, he's probably not going to. I can't imagine they'd be signing him back. So just maybe give me your thoughts on what his career has been for the Brewers and kind of like what you take away from it. Obviously, it didn't come without controversy because of the steroids and all that. But he was a mainstay for the Brewers for a number of years. So.
Yeah, definitely, and it's kind of a complicated situation because of what you touched on there with the controversy surrounding his career. I don't anticipate him being a fan favorite acquisition at most of the other cities that booed him rather tremendously, over the last number of years since that scandal with the recovery cream he was using and stuff like that. But you know, as far as Ryan Braun, the success that the Brewers have had under his tenure in left field, right field, and a little bit of first base as well, has been rather franchise changing. I think this was a program that really lingered in mediocrity for a number of years since some of their heydays in the 70s and 80s, and that class that came up with Ryan Braun, Prince Fielder, and Ricky Weeks. I mean, they really changed the culture, and really, along with the new owner Mark Antonaccio, really changed the culture in Milwaukee. And I think the expectations have changed tremendously. And when you uh, dig in a little bit to some of the answers that Christian Yelich provided, as far as why he chose to re-sign with Milwaukee. He said conversations with Ryan Braun were a huge part of that, and I think that's something to consider as well when you consider his legacy, at least in the Milwaukee area, is that he was. It sounds like fairly instrumental in convincing Christian Yelich to stay and sign on for a 10-year deal, and that's not insignificant. And you know, uh, as you look ahead to this, I have obviously caught a lot of the rumblings about him selling his apartment in Milwaukee, and all his stuff. And um, I don't think that's uncommon. I mean, you hear reports about big stars selling houses when they come up on free agent years, and living accommodations coming up on free agent years fairly frequently. So I don't find that to be definitive proof that he's not going to be around next year. I think the bigger thing to consider is the DH rule in the NL, because he kind of pointed to that, because initially it looked like they were looking about keeping the DH rule in the NL for the next 2 seasons, 2020 and 2021. Um, but it now sounds like that is something that's going to have to be negotiated in future player negotiations this winter. And I think at this point we are not looking at the DH rule in the NL. And Ryan doesn't bring a whole lot defensively at this stage. He's not going to cover a great deal of ground. I think he plays a serviceable first base if they want to go in that direction. But I don't think he also expresses a great deal of interest in playing defense at this stage of his career. He's 37, 38 years old, and I don't blame him. But I think that is the bigger thing to keep an eye on. I think at this stage, I think he just wants to hit, and I think at this stage he's kind of earned that right. He's played a great deal of defense, run around Miller Park and ballparks around the league for years now, and maybe just wants to get one more year of hitting in. I think it makes sense from a financial standpoint that the Brewers did not pick up his option. Typically, that last year in a deal is deliberately expensive to kind of get players to renegotiate and teams back to the negotiating table. So I'm not surprised that they didn't renew it. I think there is potential that the Brewers bring him back on a shortened deal or a smaller deal, not worth the 17, 18 million I think he was due to be paid this year. I think there's definitely potential for that, but otherwise, maybe Braun looks to get picked up by one of the California teams and maybe somebody in the AL and get an opportunity to play DH somewhere because I think he could definitely be considering those options as he kind of enters free agency for the first time, I think, basically in his career. So, yeah, as far he's obviously the big free agent guy for Milwaukee this year, and a couple of the other names that I kind of looked down the list at were Brett Anderson, who I forgot to touch on as far as one of the acquisitions going into this year. He kind of had a middle of the road 2020 with a 4-4 record and 10 starts with a 4.21 ERA, and was, I think, serviceable veteran leadership, but it was another one of these guys that going into this year, I think GM David Stearns was just kind of looking at as a 1-year rental, kind of kick the tires on a veteran kind of guy. Other than that, Eric Sogard, obviously, in his second stint in Milwaukee, provided some infield versatility and was pretty good at getting on base this year leading off. But at 35, I wouldn't call him a high priority to re-sign either. As I mentioned, Jed Gyorko was one player that really, kind of shined in various spots this year, and I would be very interested to see how he would perform in a 162 game season in Milwaukee. He signed for the Brewers for $1 million for a 1-year contract this past year, and so if they could get him for another, kind of veteran minimum deal, I would definitely be interested in seeing them re-sign him. And third base is also not a deep market in free agency this year, so I really like the idea of, bringing him back. And then finally, two other guys that kind of showed up for me were Ryan Healy and Shelby Miller, who were little more than depth for the Brewers this year, got some experience, but I'm not sure if Shelby made it to the majors this year or if he was just kind of minor league depth. But Healy, got a couple at bats, was not big factor for the Brewers. So those are kind of the free agents that I'm looking at, and I think the overall theme is that David Stearns, kind of going into this year, signed a lot of guys on 1 or 2 year deals, kind of realizing maybe there's potential in the next 2 years to kind of overhaul things, kind of a soft rebuild, but maybe get some tread some water for a little bit, and then maybe allow some of these younger guys to develop, and then jump into the next competitive window here in the next few years while Christian Yelich is still in his prime, and you have some other opportunities there. So
the one guy you mentioned, Jerko, that's definitely one guy that they probably would be somebody they would like to re-sign for sure with the way he performed. I would be interested in seeing that as well, how he performs over a full season. As far as the starting pitching goes, they definitely need some depth there. They have now with the two starters you mentioned there with Anderson and Miller. They they were both free agents. So like, what were some of the guys that you saw? Like, if you looked at the free agent market, like what was some guys you'd like to target as far as that goes?
Yeah, and as I looked at the kind of free agency picture for the Brewers, I think there were two positions, starting pitching being one of them, that I think they should target this year, and it's a little bit difficult to discern what targets they may have based on their market. Obviously, the dream, I was kind of looking through, or I saw one of your recent tweets about the Yankees dream offseason and picking up guys who, you know, are looking to fetch 15, $20 million annually deals this year. And, I obviously a Brewers fan doesn't quite, maybe have the realistic expectation of such lofty ambitions. So, as we look at the starting pitcher market, it really depends on how much Milwaukee's willing to spend. And I think if the recent track record is any indication, it's probably not to be going after these guys who are looking to command deals of 10, 15, $20 million annually this year. And obviously the pipe dream would be, to get somebody like Trevor Bauer, who has said in his vlogs how much he enjoys Milwaukee. But I just don't see a deal like that coming together for his market value, based on David Stern's track record of not really forking out big assets or contracts to starting pitchers. So, as I look further down the list, I also don't think any of these guys, maybe closer in the $10 million range, are really realistic. I've seen some people project, and I think these are kind of similarly lofty expectations, but the Brewers to maybe go after a guy like Marcus Stroman, James Paxton, Jake Odorizzi. I don't personally see them making that move, just again based on that track record, because those guys are going to be commanding, perhaps deals of north of 8, 9, $10 million. So as you kind of work your way down the list of free agent pitchers, you start to look for guys more in the mold of the Brett Anderson, the Josh Lindblom, Jolie Chassin, guys they've brought in recent years that maybe getting towards the end of their career may have had one or two bad years in a row and maybe looking to bounce back as veterans in a new location, and guys that you can get for a year to three tops that may run you $3 to $5 million annually. So that puts you in the price range of some of these guys on maybe the other side of 33, like John Lester, Jeff Samardzija, Jordan Zimmerman, maybe some under the radar guys like Taijuan Walker, Alex Wood potentially. I'd be interested in seeing if they could get somebody like Julio Tehran after he had a rough season with the Angels for maybe a discount. I've also seen people project Corey Kluber, which might be on the high end of their target market, but I could, potentially see them going after someone like him as well. So, those are the kind of guys that I could realistically see Milwaukee going after. Like, I think every team could see a spot in the rotation for a guy like Trevor Bauer, but the financial situation being what it is right now, I just don't see a lot to justify, too much hope as far as Brewer fans can be concerned of Milwaukee going after Bauer at this point.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. Yeah, just going off that topic too with Hader. Well, don't have to really go much into detail about what kind of packages, but like what would be a kind of a perfect package that you would like to see for him?
Well, yeah, it's hard to, as much as I want to get inside the mind of a MLB GM and project what a player might be worth. Um, it's tough to make that call, especially when it comes to prospects. I think more than likely Milwaukee's looking at a deal for 2 to 3 prospects for Hader. Yeah, I don't think they'll necessarily get a proven commodity, but it would be great to get like a a solid everyday third baseman. I know, I believe the name Gio Urshela of your Yankees has come up in the past in trade speculations and stuff like that. And someone like him who can you can just plug in at third and kind of not worry too much about that corner, because that I think is another significant hole for Milwaukee as you look. It was going into this season, and I think it remains based on the guys that they signed and just kind of filled that spot with this past year. So I think if you could get an everyday third baseman and one or two prospects, that would be the ideal package. But I think more than likely you're looking at 2 to 3 prospects. Obviously, if you could get somebody who's maybe some starting pitching depth, because you could always use more pitching. Somebody who could potentially contribute in the next couple of years. They have some significant investments as far as draft capital. They have Ethan Small as one of their top pitching prospects who's due up in the next couple of years, and Zach Brown is another. Guys that could potentially break into the league here in the next couple of years, but maybe you can always use more starting pitching, and that's kind of the what I'm looking at is a potential ideal trade scenario. I think also, as I remember touching on in our season preview, I think, the time for Hader to get traded I think remains pretty ripe, but I don't think it was even as ripe, or I don't think it's as ripe now as it even was prior to this season, because again, this is the third straight year for Hader with his ERA going up. It was now, I think it was over 3 this year after 2 years of keeping it under 2, and or under 3, I should say. And the walks were up for him. He had 20 last year in 61 games, or 2 years ago, I should say. In 2019, he had 20 last year in 61 games, while in the games this year, he had 21 games and 10 walks. So that's nearly that's half as many walks in about a third as many games. And that regression kind of concerns me with the control. But I think there is still a great deal of trade value for him. And with the leverage of having Devin Williams as that guy who can potentially stand in as a closer. I think there's versatility there for the Brewers to make the move or not make the move. And obviously Hader's not too expensive yet either, so that is definitely helpful as they look to the next year or two. One other hole I wanted to touch on too is, again, that third base hole in the lineup. As far as they look at free agent targets this year, and as I mentioned earlier, the third base market is not looking too deep this year, but there is one player that I would like to see Milwaukee make a run, especially if they can't get Jerko back, and maybe even if they do, is Maikel Franco. I think he's got the kind of bat to be a difference maker, and somebody who, along with Jerko, who I think over the last number of years before he came to Milwaukee was kind of a Brewer killer at Miller Park. He hits well there, and is the kind of guy who I could definitely see the Brewers going after, to shore up that corner infield, because I think, whether it be first base or third, I think third is the more glaring hole, but they do have at least Jerko potentially, if they re-sign him, to fill that hole. But maybe they could bounce him over to first, get Maikel Franco for third. And then I think one other guy is a kind of versatile infielder that I'd like to see them potentially go after is Marwin Gonzalez. A guy who can obviously play all over the infield, and I think has played some outfield. And just another guy to fill that versatile utility infielder role. They obviously tried Brock Holt, a couple other guys this past year, and Brock Holt kind of flamed out for Milwaukee. Was it another one of those guys who maybe in a 162 game season gets more opportunities, but didn't really have the opportunity to shine in an abridged season here. So as far as free agent targets, I think those are some of the guys that I would be interested in seeing Milwaukee go after this offseason for sure.
Yeah, so going into some discussion about the division, I think this year the division is kind of up in the air again. It's going to be another tight race for every team except for the Pirates, because the Pirates are not going to be good again. But
Yeah.
the Reds, I think, are going to be a little bit. They're not going to be as good because they're not going to. I don't believe they're going to be able to retain Bauer. He's going to go somewhere else, and then like their rotation won't be as good. So I think the Reds are fall off a little bit. I think probably the Cardinals are probably the favorites at this point. I think they have what it takes to get that division title again. The one thing is going to be if they can get Ozuna back or not. Ozuna is definitely a big part of their lineup. So if they re-sign him, then that's huge. But if they don't, then that's obviously a negative for them. So I think just a lot of these teams have question marks. Just like
Wasn't Ozuna with the Braves this past year, or? Yeah,
yeah,
Ozuna's with the Braves, but I don't know if he's up for a new deal. I haven't looked at.
Yeah, he is a free agent, so maybe if they wanted to try to get him.
I wasn't sure what you meant there. Gotcha. Yeah, but Ozuna was a big contributor for the Cardinals, and if they get his bat back in their lineup, they're definitely, a contender again. Yeah, I think the Reds. I think you're spot on. Like, losing Bauer is potentially a big deal for them, and they were a team that really seemed to go all in on 2020, and that's another lineup too that, like, when they pick up Moustakas and they I think they re-signed Nick Castellanos, and they were really built to do some damage, I think, over a 162 game season this year. But again, kind of new pieces and new locations, and stars kind of struggling was the kind of theme of 2020 across the league, not just with the Brewers or Reds, but so they, kind of maybe fell short of some of their lofty expectations for this year, and the window may have closed as soon as it opened for them. But they'll still, be in position to do some damage, I think. And I think the Cubs are a real wild card. I really didn't see the Theo Epstein news the other day coming. I don't know if you what are your thoughts on that, Alex?
I kind of did see it coming a little bit. I think they definitely seem like they're kind of on the downfall right now. They just like they were supposed to be a dynasty back when they won in 2016. Everybody was saying that they're going to keep coming back and winning, and I mean going back to the playoffs and going far, and then kind of just never got it together again after that. And now they're going to have a lot of questions to answer, as far as obviously Epstein now stepping down. So, and then their contracts coming up too with Baez and Bryant. They're not going to be able to retain both of them, and Bryant could be a possibility of being moved this offseason along with Lindor. So, and their rotation is going to be a big question mark, as far because they have Lester and Quintana both free agents, and then they got Hendricks still, but other than him, they have really just a bunch of question marks there, I think. So, yeah, just going back on that point, I think every team in this division has a lot of question marks, so it's just going to be really up in the air.
Yeah, and I think the encouraging thing to look at for Milwaukee, as you kind of look at the next couple years, is I think they don't have a great deal invested in expensive contracts, whereas you're looking at the Cubs, or they actually started to get some payoff on their very lucrative Yu Darvish deal this past year. Yu Darvish was a very very competitive starter for them this year, but in the past couple of years, if you talk to a Cubs fan about how that deal was going, they were not feeling too great about it. And I think one of the advantages for the Brewers is they don't have a lot of contracts like that. I mean, basically, one of the only people under contract beyond like 2 or 3 years out is Yelich. So they have a lot of versatility in their spending. And as you look at a situation where sports leagues are kind of dealing with salary cap issues, and obviously Major League Baseball is not one of those, but there's still obviously owners dealing with perhaps less discretionary income than they have been used to over the last number of years. So, the spending and free agency is going to be less so for teams that potentially have been more active in the last number of years. Um, so that I think plays a little bit into Milwaukee's favor that they have some versatility and they don't have guys locked down for 5-6 year deals. Beyond Yelich, who you obviously want to have around for as long as he can be around, and I think that plays pretty well into the Brewers' hands. And like you said there with the Cubs, they've got some tough decisions coming up for whatever new GM they try to hire, and that situation is definitely going to be something to keep an eye on as far as the trade rumors maybe surrounding Chris Bryant. I doubt they would trade him in the division, but some wishful thinking Brewers fans have said, oh, if you don't like Chris Bryant, send him over here. But I don't necessarily see that move happening. I think across sports, trades in the division are pretty rare because that's a guy that has obviously a great deal of potential to hurt you in the years to come. So, that I think is, my prognosis as far as the NL Central goes is, we're going to have to definitely keep a close eye um, on the moves made this offseason because, as I mentioned earlier with the batting average, I mean, all five of these teams were in the bottom half and basically the bottom third of batting averages. So I think all GMs are kind of looking at that and thinking, we need to get some guys in here or make some moves that will, help us move that statistic up, get some guys on base and drive in some runs for sure.
Yeah, and as far as the free agent market goes, I think there are quite a bit of guys like that that are just contact type hitters that are get on base. And as you look down the list, you got like Tommy La Stellas of the world. You got Marcus Simeon, guys like that are, very good just contact hitters. They don't really go, boom or bust with home runs. And so I think any team right now with the way the league's going needs got more guys like that, like also the DJ LeMahieu's of the world like that. So
Yeah, not LeMahieu, but LaStella. Obviously, LeMahieu's a great player, but LaStella, I think, is a guy. I forgot to mention him when we were talking third baseman for the Brewers. I think he's a guy who, would work well as a nice lefty bat, a guy who gets on base, a guy that has a little bit of versatility around the infield. I would love to see the Brewers pick up. Him as a lefty bat in the lineup. I think he makes a lot of sense to go after as well at third base. But yeah, there's definitely going to be a premium on because I think GMs are aware of the way the league is trending with strikeouts and stuff like that, and guys that can get on base, can get bat on ball, and move guys over, move guys in are going to be at a premium. I think in this off season to come here for sure.
yeah, definitely. So I don't know if you have any other thoughts about the Brewers or the division, anything really. Just
Yeah, I mean that's pretty. It's pretty well all that I had. I think it will. Obviously last year, we had no idea. I think the bridge season that was to come, and I think GMs were planning a great deal for your typical 162 game season, and it'll be interesting to see how general managers look at the year to come. Whether are we, what assurances they have that maybe things will be better enough that we will have a 162 game season this year, because obviously depending on who you're listening to. There's a great deal of conjecture about will things be looking normal by March and April. Obviously, there's been some positive news on the vaccine front. We certainly hope that COVID is under control. Um, in the years to come, NBA is looking at a season, I think, starting in December here. And, um, you know, whether we're out of the pandemic or not, I think as GMs plan for the future, it'll be interesting to see whether they are looking at, you know, uh, planning for a 162 game season, planning for another short season, maybe factoring that into negotiations with players. All that stuff will be very interesting to see now that we have a little bit more idea of what we're facing than we had in December and
Yeah.
this past December and January. So
Yeah, exactly. And that's what I think, like, that's going to make this offseason drag on a lot. It's going to be really slow, not going to be much deals at the beginning because just teams are their GMs are waiting to see what's going to go on and and they're trying to figure out what they're going to plan for, really, I think. So,
yeah, there was a great deal of that last year. I think even or the last couple years, wasn't it? Wasn't it like Jake Arrieta or some of these guys that like were lingering well into the season unsigned? And I think that's even going to be exacerbated in the next few months here because I don't think it would be wise for any general managers or teams to jump into lucrative deals, for the long term when you're looking at, um, the potential. I mean, you think about the Mookie Betts trade last offseason, and all of a sudden you're you're looking at a season that may not happen, and the Dodgers may have given up all these prospects and stuff like that for a player that's never going to play for them. That was a very real possibility they were looking at, and I think a lot of GMs may get a little shell shocked. Obviously, that worked out pretty well for the Dodgers. They end up signing him long term, but that was hardly guaranteed when they made the move. And all of a sudden, you're looking at we just gave up a bunch of prospects for a guy who may not play at all. But that that I think is definitely something to keep in mind too. Is just the aggression level of general managers across the league. I think is going to be pulled back even further, over these next couple months because we definitely see how things play out and see what we're looking at as far as the spring training and what protocols remain in place as we prepare for the 2021 season.
yeah, another big thing of concern is going to be of whether or not fans are allowed in because that's obviously about a big part of the money that they bring in. So
Yep.
we'll have to see what they do with that. If we get a vaccine, they'll probably be able to let fans in. But if we don't at that point, then we might not have any fans, or maybe just be at a half capacity or something like that. So
Yep, sports is a business, and I think in a sport that doesn't have necessarily the same revenue structure and salary cap of like the NFL or the luxury tax of the NBA. I think that's kind of one of the only parameters they have in place is you can only spend how much you have. That's definitely going to be some factor for some of these owners who are looking at a bottom line that did not look great for them, and that was one of the original sticking points as we were even negotiating a 60-game season. Was I think was negotiating like how much are owners going to lose if they have games with no fans versus having no games at all, and all that stuff. So all those conversations are going to be remain, obviously going to still remain factors as long as the pandemic is still ongoing. But yeah, I guess that's all I had, Alex. I don't know if you had any other questions for me or thoughts, on the Brewer season.
no, I think that was about it. So yeah, thanks for coming back on, and you're always welcome again any other time. So
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. It's always great to talk with you, and thank you so much for having me on.
yeah, no problem. So that was our Brewers discussion on their off season, this past season. Yeah, continue listening to these episodes. Coming out every other couple days, as I have time to record whenever I get around to doing them. And then of course when free agent signings come in, trades happen. I'll be talking about that a lot on here as well. So yeah, thanks for listening, and you can never have too much pod tar.